Okay, let's start. I want to welcome you to our program tonight, Demystifying Postgraduate Awards. Hi, I'm Lisa Chapman, MBA, class of 81 from the School of Management and president of First Gen Yale. And I'm pleased to welcome you tonight to our program and to introduce you to our wonderful panel. First, I'd like to welcome and introduce you to Rebecca Westfall, who is the Yale College Assistant Dean and Fellowships and Funding Director. She joined CIPE after 11 years in admissions, where she was the Director of International Admissions, Africa and Europe. In 2019, Rebecca was awarded the Linda K. Lorimer Award for work on the Yale College Safety Net. Rebecca is also a Berkeley College Executive Fellow and a first-year advisor. Welcome, Rebecca. It's also my honor. This is our third program with Rebecca, and we're very pleased to have a partnership and work together on sharing information from the Office of Fellowships and Funding with the Yale community. Next, I'd like to introduce Sarah Pittiful, class of 22, who will be attending University College London for a master's degree in PPE Health as a Fulbright scholar. At Yale, she is majoring in ethics, politics, and economics, and is pre-med. Sarah has been involved in the YCC, the Haven Free Clinic, and the Yale Hunger and Homeless Action Project, and is a research assistant at the Yale Copper Center. Prior, she received several summer fellowships for research at Yale. Now I'd like to introduce Laura Plata, class of 19, who's pursuing a Master's of Science in Refugee and Forced Migration Studies and a Master's in Science in Comparative Social Policy as a Rhodes Scholar. At Yale, she studied also EP&E, and as a Mellon Mays Fellow, worked on the link between criminalization of Central American asylum seekers and closed borders. After graduation, Laura worked in Mexico City, tracking migrant kidnappers and researching challenges faced by deported Mexican families. Welcome, Laura. Also, I want to introduce Brian Reyes, class of 21, who's pursuing a master's in social policy as a Rhodes Scholar. At Yale, he studied history and was active in La Casa, engaged in legislative advocacy for undocumented youth, and led events to connect diverse communities of color. As the first generation son of Dominican immigrants, Brian hopes to work in community and economic development. Welcome, Brian. And also Allison Gardy, class of 88. Oh, Brian, can you wave? Can you wave? Sorry. Hello, thank you. And next we have Allison Gardy, class of 88, who owns Gardy Communications Strategy and directs the Yale Community Connect literature. I have it abbreviated here, comparative literature major in Spanish and Russian. And she had a Fulbright to Mexico in 1988 and 1989. Allison is president of the Fulbright Association of Greater New York chapter from 00 to 02, and a director from 01 to 06, and from 2016 to the present. Allison was the 92nd Street Y Director of International Relations from 01 to 16. Now it's my honor and privilege to turn the program over to Rebecca. Rebecca, thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and welcome everybody. It's really great to see so many folks with us. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. And what we're going to do is a little bit of an overview of some of these fellowships and what to expect. And then we're going to dig into some questions with our panelists. So as Lisa said, I'm in the Fellowships and Funding Office, and I handle all of the fellowships for actually the UK and Ireland. But I have a number of other advisors in the office who work with students on things like Fulbright and Truman and Soros and Schwartzman and all those other fellowships. So what we're going to start, I wanted to start actually by talking about our website, because it is an amazing resource and it has a lot of stuff on it that I would encourage you to take a look at. Just remember funding.yale.edu, and we're not just talking about postgraduate fellowships. If you are a first year, a second year, or even a junior, you can still apply for summer fellowships the entire time you're at Yale, and we have a lot of information about those, so check that out. But if you're on this call and you're like, well, actually, you know what, I actually don't even know what a fellowship is, let me explain. So a fellowship is essentially funding or money to do something, and that could be study, it could be an internship, it could be a research project. There are a lot of different things that you can do with fellowships, and fellowships are also competitive. So you have to apply, they're merit-based, you apply, there's a process that you go through and you're evaluated by a committee. So that's what a fellowship is. And Yale has many for summer, for term time, and also for after you leave Yale. So there are a lot of different resources. What we're going to talk about today, though, are postgraduate fellowships. And just in terms of timeline for those, if you are a rising senior, this is your summer to begin applying for postgraduate fellowships if you want to. But I'm going to underscore right now that this is your first opportunity. It is not your last. You can apply for many of these fellowships actually long after you graduate. And we were just talking earlier, Allison was saying, yep, you can apply for Fulbrights up until, you know, much later in life, which is really, really exciting. So there are a lot of fellowships. You can see here, you can make an appointment with us. We have ways to get started, how to apply, online presentations, and a whole bunch of ways to search for things. And there are, of course, a whole ton of postgraduate fellowships. And I'm just going to put something in the chat right now, which I think will be helpful. Let's hope I've got the right thing. There we go. It's a PDF of fellowships, which I hope will be helpful to you. It basically includes a list of eligibility and purpose and deadline time. So keep that handy. It's a really useful resource. But some of the fellowships here are ones that you're going to want to apply for with our help. So some of these fellowships, the Rhodes Scholarship, for example, which you'll hear about tonight, only for Oxford University, does require nomination or endorsement, which means you work through my office first before you apply to the actual competition. Marshall is the same. Fulbright, we encourage students to work through our office. Gates Cambridge is a Cambridge University scholarship where you can get up to 3 years funded. The Schwartzman Scholars, you can get a master's degree in global affairs at Tsinghua University in Beijing. The Mitchell, a year in Ireland or Northern Ireland. So there are many more fellowships than I think people know about, and it's worth doing some exploring. So check out that PDF. I think it's going to be really, really helpful. So one thing that I always talk about is maybe you are in the process of thinking about doing this summer, and you're like, what should I be doing now? Well, here's a little outline of some things that you can get going with straight away. And I think the first thing is just to research your options. If you want to go over to the UK or to another country to study, you've got to figure out what that degree program is and which university you want to go to. So research your options. And I always talk with students about, think about fellowships as a whole as your plan A. Don't think about Fulbright as plan A, Rhodes as plan B, Marshall as plan C, and Soros as plan D. That's probably not a good idea. So put all fellowships in plan A and think about plan B as maybe a job or maybe a grad school in the US or whatever else interests you at the time. Talking to possible recommenders can begin early, and it's a good idea to sit down with them and figure out, you know, maybe they have good ideas about what you can pursue and how you should go about this. Don't forget that faculty at Yale, they've taught everywhere, they've studied everywhere, they have colleagues everywhere, so they can give you some good ideas about how to approach that. You can make an appointment to see me or one of our other advisors in the office. We work all summer long, except for vacation. And so you can make an appointment with us and we'll sit down with you. And that's probably maybe one of the first steps you should take, is just meet with us and talk about the options. Getting organized is also a really good idea. Just keep track of what you're doing and how you're preparing, because some of these fellowships, it's a fairly long process and you want to keep track of all the stuff you're researching and pulling together as you prepare for those competitions. And then most fellowships, in fact, all fellowships require some kind of writing, whether it's a personal statement or you're writing about your proposed academic program or your research. You can begin the writing process at any point. And that just means ideas, anecdotes, things that you want to include, etc., etc. Just get them down and keep organized about it. So there's a few action points. I wanted to bust some fellowship myths right off the bat. And some people think, hey, you know what? I need a really high GPA to do something like this, like a 4.0. And you know what? No, you don't. There are some fellowships which do have a couple of GPA requirements, but the majority of them do not. And so I wanted just to put that out there. Even the fellowships with the GPA requirements like Rhodes and Marshall, which is 3.7, you don't need a 4.0 to do that either. You can be 3.7 on the nose. The odds of winning are too small. Well, you know what? You know what the admit rate at Yale was this year? The odds are small, but they're better than getting into Yale. So you never know, right? So it's always good just to take a step forward. And I hear a lot like, it's too much work. It's too much work. Yes, it's work, but it's good work and it's helpful work and it's useful for how you will progress in other things too, not just these fellowships. And you can pace yourself. And I hope that some of the students will talk about that later. But you can ask away later on about some other myths that maybe you've heard, and we can dig into those as well. So I'm just going to go, oh, look, there you are, Brian. A few folks who who have won these fellowships in the past, who this is last year's Rhodes Scholars, or actually now 2 years ago. And then another group, there's Laura, who's on our call today, and a few other folks who won the Rhodes Fellowship a few years ago. So lots of Yaleys who are out doing these things. I also just wanted to show some of our Soros fellows who were awarded recently. You know, there's a lot of folks from Yale winning these competitions, and they're all available to talk to you. So please reach out to people. All right, and then last of all, you know, we have info sessions, we have drop-ins, we have advising appointments. Please reach out and get in touch with us, because we're here for you and we have a lot of information to give you. All right, so I am going to stop there because I really want to chat with some of the students. We'll stop the share, and let's start by digging into, I'm going to ask a few folks, when did you actually start the process of applying for your fellowship? And I'm going to ask Sarah, because I think Sarah has been through it most recently. And as you respond, maybe you could just say actually what fellowship you have worked on most recently, and what was your process for applying?
Yeah, I actually started, so I recently just did the Fulbright Fellowship and actually went through the application process for a lot of other senior fellowships, and it definitely takes quite a while. But I started, I believe, around maybe July before my senior fall. And so that was because a lot of times your first round at the Yale level will be in the end of August or the beginning of September. So Fulbright actually was around, I believe, like September 6th, and you're going to submit it to your actual so you submit it to campus, and then it goes through initial Yale review, and then you would be able to get further nominated to like the national kind of round. So yeah, getting started early is best. And then because I had started in July, I was able to kind of give my essays a couple drafts and have enough time to get everything done.
Awesome, thank you. And Laura, could I ask you the same question? I know this was a couple of years ago for you now, but do you remember the when you started the process of applying for fellowships?
Yeah, so I ended up applying to UK fellowships twice. The first time, I think I started a little bit like in July, I would say. And then the second time around, I think I applied maybe similarly around July, but perhaps a bit earlier, like a few weeks after the term ended.
Awesome, thank you. And maybe I could ask Brian and Allison, when you were applying, what were the resources that you used to help you in the process? And Allison, if you want to begin, I know that your application was a while ago, but I'm sure you remember some of the resources you used.
Yes, I think one of the resources in particular that I used might be relevant, especially to students today. I took a year off after my sophomore year, and at the time that was unusual. There were a few of us who did it, and that year off informed my Fulbright. It actually informed all of my studies after when I returned to Yale, hence comparative literature. The Russian came first and then came the Spanish. So what I brought to the application process was living experience in Mexico, travel in South America for context, And that gave me sort of direction and confidence. The Spanish I learned during the year, thanks to Yale, I was put in a bilingual Spanish students class, which was a wonderful, I hope Yale still has that. It was geared to people who had learned Spanish at home or in community and needed to strengthen formal grammar. And then finally, other resources were the Bates and Bildner Travel Fellowships. I'm glad to see from your list that the Bates Fellowship is still available. And that allowed me to go back to Mexico after my junior year and understand new dimensions of such incredibly intricate, cultures. And of course, my senior advisor made all the difference in making me feel that this was something I could really shoot for.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison. And Brian, do you recall the resources that you use? And maybe you can just give us a little update on what you're actually doing at the moment as well.
Yeah, sure. Like Lee said, I'm currently in my first year at Oxford on the roads, and the resources I use, I would say mostly three sets of resources. Number one was Rebecca. You were the main resource. I once read a sort of post-interview report that said throughout all this process, you're going to get lots of advice. The two main sources of advice, you should sort of filter all the advice through your own sort of lens, trying to make sure that it actually applies to you. The two sources of advice that you should not doubt are one, yourself, and two, Rebecca. I would co-sign that. The second set of resources was just generally the people that Rebecca, your office, connected us with. So for example, for the Marshall, we were advised to get in our applications or drafts of our applications in early, and we got some feedback on them. And I found that to be super useful. And then number three was just alumni. So again, like people that Rebecca's office connected us with, people who had gone through the process, become finalists or become winners, were all like incredibly helpful. Just like short 30-minute phone calls were super insightful, and people were really kind in sharing their time.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Maybe let's change the question a little bit. Maybe I'll ask Sarah, when you were applying for a fellowship, did you feel apprehensive about applying for a competitive fellowship? And then secondly, what did you learn by applying for a fellowship?
I definitely think I was pretty intimidated at first. And I think I think in some ways as the process kept going and, you get from the Yale round to the national round, I think it got a little bit easier because I knew that I'd been through it once, but in other ways it also got harder because I knew, well, now I'm on the big stage. Now this is going to be more competitive. Now I'm being really closely judged and I'm going to be up against so many people. And also just, coming as a disadvantaged applicant, I think that there is always an edge of how on earth am I going to be as good as everyone else who's got maybe more resources or has had more access to these kinds of bits of information even. But I think that, being able to lean on the fellowships office was really key. And I also think that having had applied to just Yale fellowships earlier on in my sophomore, junior year, and knowing, just how summer fellowships at Yale worked, I think it becomes repetitive enough almost in a way that is really productive. And so I knew what it was going to be like and I knew what to expect. And so I think literally just going through so many fellowships and applications that you get used to it. And, even now as I'm going to start hopefully applying to things like medical school, I know that I've been through so many different applications that I feel really ready for even further. So I think that it just is a thing that gets better with practice and also being able to lean on a lot of the resources figures that are at Yale.
And of course, you gather all these recommendations, which you can reuse for one thing after another, which is really good. Allison, can I ask you the same question? Did you feel apprehensive about applying for a competitive fellowship? And what did you learn by going through that process?
Sure. Well, first of all, I love, Sarah, your resilient sense of that every application filled out just sets you up for the next time. And it's never a loss, whether you get it or not. And it helps you with your own self-understanding, right? Because a lot of the questions and applications are so self-reflective. So I think thinking about it that way, this will always help you. Filling out an application, regardless of the result, will always help you articulate to yourself who you are and what you're interested in and to others. sure, I felt apprehensive, and my advisor prepared me and said, there are 2 rounds to this, and you won't know the results for, gosh, maybe 9 months or so, or 10 months. And I remember thinking, do I apply for something else simultaneously? I would hate to turn down one or the other because I would apply for something that I care about. In the end, I decided not to apply for anything else and take a chance and just figure out my way if I didn't get a Fulbright. But also, the beauty of having, again, taken that year off after my sophomore year was that it exposed me to challenges that put applying for a grant in perspective. I was in the Mexico City earthquake of 1985, which was an 8.2 on the Richter scale, another large quake the next day. I traveled through South America during the transition from military dictatorships. So frankly, having the peace, quiet, and stability to apply for a grant, no matter the outcome, was a privilege. And I think that stance can't hurt anyone.
Can I put that same question to Laura? Laura, what did you learn by going through this process? And especially, I mean, you've talked about going through it twice. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I applied to the UK fellowships, like the chunk of Marshall, Rhodes and Gates, Cambridge twice. And I guess from going through the process, I learned that everything is definitely like really within reach of anyone who's interested in applying. Obviously, these things can seem really overwhelming and somewhat daunting from the outside, but having gone through the process twice, after going through it once, I could tell my second time around, like, okay, well, these are the things you can kind of break down into like more manageable chunks. And these are steps that you can take today and tomorrow and in a week or a month from now to make this a much more easy process to navigate. So that's like one of the big takeaways that I at least learned from the process. But then I think as well, just similar to what Sarah already mentioned, there's a lot of self-reflection that goes on with these applications, which in itself is really, really valuable. And it's something that I got told a lot when I was applying to these things, which felt a little bit like, well, but the point is that I want to win one of these things, not just reflect into infinitum. But it really is something that I think was really, really valuable at the time and has kind of been an important part of centering my own identity from that point onwards, which is something that I'm carrying with me now and into future academic or workspaces that I'll be going into. So all of that is to say that like the work you put into an application, whether it works out or doesn't work out, is still going to be really valuable in surprising ways down the road, I think.
Thank you. Yeah. Could I ask, and maybe I'll put this to all of you actually, when first-gen students particularly are considering going through the fellowships process, what sort of things do you think folks should be thinking about, if there are specific things? Brian, would you like to start?
Sure. I think I have sort of one more practical tip and another sort of more general one. One practical one is, I don't know how many people feel this, but I think for me, one thing about being first gen was I was a bit apprehensive in reaching out to people, and especially adults. So reaching out to professors for advice, reaching out to people who had won these things before, who were finalists. And I would say, don't feel apprehensive about that. Like, obviously be respectful and be mindful of people's time, as you would sort of on a normal basis. But I found that people were very, very generous with their time, like I said before, and it was super helpful to talk to people who have been through these processes. And so, since we often don't have these sort of networks to tap into in our personal lives, like, take advantage of the networks that you're afforded by being a Yale student, a first-gen Yale student. The second thing that I'm thinking of is, to the extent that you're comfortable sort of discussing like your personal life in these things, like if there's meaningful connections to be mined and discussed and reflected upon in connecting your personal to your academic and your intellectual and professional, like don't be afraid to discuss that and talk about those experiences, because there's often a lot of very useful meaning and very, I think, like important motivations driving what we do academically and professionally that come from traversing all these spaces as a first gen student, especially when at a place like Yale. So those are the two things I'd say.
Sorry. Laura, anything to add there?
Yeah, I'd also add, and this is in support of Allison's gap year, taking time off point. But I think that, like, as first gen students, I mean, basing this off of my own personal experience, like a lot of our professional aspirations or like our next moves are always in relation to the communities we're coming from, or trying to support our families, or trying to support ourselves. So it takes a lot, I think, to realize that that's not that you can take time for yourself, whether that be like doing a fellowship for a year, or perhaps just working for a year before deciding to apply to one of these more competitive fellowships. But that time can be really valuable. And I'm really glad that Rebecca encouraged me to apply as a senior. But personally, what I really needed post-graduating was just some time out of school, and some time to like build my own sense of self outside of just being a student. And it was after having that time that I think I was able to come to the idea like, well, grad school is still for me, and I'm excited about doing this now. And this is what I would want to do were I to be at, you know, a place like Oxford. So just to emphasize that, like, I think it's really important that as a first gen student, you just check in with yourself and like have an honest conversation about what it is exactly that you might need after graduating from a place like Yale, which is really, really wonderful, but also really, really intense. And it might not be the case that you want to launch yourself straight into like another intense academic institution, or maybe it is. But either way, I think it's totally fair for you to decide like this isn't for me right now, or say like it is for me right now, but because that's what you feel your spirit and like identity kind of needs.
Thanks, Laura. And I'll just underscore that point again, which I made earlier, which is that your first opportunity, of course, to apply to many of these things is the summer between junior and senior year, and through your senior year. But you can apply to many of these fellowships after you graduate. So you can really wait. You know, Knight Hennessy at Stanford, you can apply to up to 5 years after you leave. Marshall up to 2 years. Mitchell up to the age of 30. Schwartzman up to the age of 28. You know, so it just keeps going. So they're still there. They're still there for you. Allison, did you have anything to add on that point?
You know, sure. I love what Laura and Brian were just saying, checking in with yourself, being on your own timeline. And thank you, Rebecca, for the reminder that people can really apply at other points. For the Fulbright Specialist Grant, there are people who are, you know, seniors who are applying for Fulbright, all kinds of Fulbright grants, specialists, administrative, long-term, short-term grants. So I will put in the chat a couple of resources where you can see the different grants. But, you know, remember that you are not a burden to any of these programs. And forgive me if that's obvious to everyone, but I think people tend to be hard on themselves. You know, the Fulbright program is eager to enable US citizens of all backgrounds, regions, races, ethnicities, faiths, economic means to have a meaningful exchange experience abroad. And your diversity enriches the representation of the United States abroad. And that is in our interest as a country, as a community of universities and cultural exchange, and frankly, security. You know, it's in everyone's interest in all areas. And I was just mentioning earlier to our co-panelists that I came across a wonderful quote from Albert Schweitzer, who said, you know, one who gains strength by overcoming obstacles possesses the only strength which can overcome adversity. And that's exactly the kind of person that these programs, you know, wants to send abroad representing the United States. Your life story, you know, Brian alluded to, again, your comfort level with sharing this, but just maybe recognizing within yourself that any aspect of your life that is involved struggle, sacrifice, bewilderment, feeling like a stranger in a strange land, you know, all of that is a kind of travel and a kind of cross-cultural experience. And you are really equipped for this because of that. And maybe more than you give yourself credit for. And the last thing I'll just say is, you know, a lot of people, I think one of the wisdom, what some of the wisdom that's emerged from the pandemic is this sense of people being more true to their own inner timeline. And there's someone in the audience here who can speak to, people who go to medical school later in life after trying other careers first. That's my mother, actually, who's on this call, and how interesting those students are when they've had life experience in other fields and how much they bring to the field of medicine as doctors who are informed by other life experiences and professions first.
Thanks so much, Allison. Sarah, was there anything that you'd like to add to those comments?
I think that I did apply like straight out as a senior, but I also do think that it is important to remember that things do change a lot, and ultimately you might want to reapply some years, or just taking things at your own kind of pace. Again, like another kind of thing is I know that I wanted to go maybe do 1 year of a master's and then maybe take another gap year and then go to medical school, but I might put that off until later, depending on whatever, I think just letting yourself kind of keep the timeline a little bit more open than you might initially expect. And again, I do think that it is true that COVID definitely did bring up a lot of making people recognize that you really can't put yourself on such a strict timeline, especially when it comes to figuring out like what you want to do education-wise and academically and what just fits you best. And I think ultimately that often will lead you to find just what is like a best fit for you.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to ask, put this next question to all of you as well. If you have specific advice that you would want to give to students about fellowship opportunities available to them, if you have anything else to share, and I'll just open up the floor for anyone else who wanted to talk about that. Or maybe I will call on somebody. Go ahead, Brian.
Sure. I just wanted to reiterate the point that the process is quite formative. Like no matter what the outcome is, I found it to be an incredibly reflective process, and was really helpful for sort of like orienting myself in terms of what I wanted to do with my life and sort of what were the questions I wanted to ask. And so it was I think a very formative and generative process. And I had sort of reached this self-satisfaction with it even before I knew any of the final outcomes. And I think that I was quite appreciative of that.
Anyone else
I guess
like
I would
to?
also
Yeah,
just, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, Lara, go ahead.
I guess I would just add that each of the fellowships, while similar in like they'll ask for like a statement of purpose or a description of like what academic program you'd be interested in. So yeah, are similar, they're still very distinct in like the particular thing that they're looking for. So I would encourage people to apply, I think, to as many as they can in a way that is going to realistically do justice to each of those applications. So for instance, like I applied to Marshall and Rhodes like around the same time. Wasn't like selected as a nominee for the Marshall within like Yale's own institutional nomination process, but then like went on to win the Rhodes, again using like very similar materials, but like obviously each application required or each scholarship was looking for something very distinct. So you can say I was a better fit for perhaps Rhodes than I was for Marshall. At the end of the day, it still got me here. So just like letting people like know that it's not like someone who's a great candidate for Gates Cambridge is also like automatically like a great candidate for Marshall, although they like could be. But again, like each of these processes is like still has its own particular things that it's looking for.
And I might add that, just as Rebecca led with saying that, think about all fellowships, not a particular fellowship, but, your plan A are all fellowships. And then maybe plan B might be getting a job. And added to that, I would say, this should really be something that you want to pursue in terms of wanting to be, let's say, abroad or in a particular place of learning, and the impact and the process and the follow-up from my Fulbright grant to Mexico continues to inform and influence my life today. It's really a never ending wellspring. So likewise, if your fellowship program has an alumni program, be part of it. I mean, really, you can do so much to continue your experience and everything that you found so enriching about it through that kind of active alumni involvement.
Thank you, Allison. Anything to finish there, and then what we're going to do is actually open it up to questions from everybody here.
I think a little bit more of a specific piece of advice, but I think that's something that I've thought about a lot is, or just like during my application process was, again, I think there is a really big aspect of just, again, being someone who's applying as an FGLI person. I think you oftentimes feel a little bit reluctant or hesitant to reach out for help, but also to ask your own professors for recommendations even, and to look for support, and to be making people do things. Like it feels like almost like it's wrong to make people do things for you in this process. And I think it is important to remember that the people who helped bring you to where you are today to be in a place to apply want you to be able to succeed, and they want you to be able to actually attend these institutions, and they love that you're passionate about these things. So I think it is really important to remember that and like be able to ask for advice freely. But also just to remember along with that I think something that helps both you and the person that's doing all of these things for you is to consistently, like literally, if you have to set a reminder in your calendar to send them updates, to, give thank you notes, be consistently in touch with them, even when you like actually go on to your fellowship, like send them a little note every now and then, and just be able to consistently give back somehow to the people that helped you get to whatever point you want to get to. And just be able to maintain good relationships with them as well, because I think that is a huge part of the fellowship process that I think gets underlooked a lot, is you really do connect with so many people through recommendations and through advising.
Yeah, that's really true. So thank you so much, everybody. It's really great to hear your thoughts on this process. So let's just open it up to questions, and please feel free to put those in the chat, or just turn your camera on, put your hand up, and we'll go through those. There's a couple of questions that have come through via email. After these fellowships, what kinds of careers do graduates find? And Allison, maybe can I put that to you, seeing as everybody here is still currently on their fellowship, but maybe I'll put that to you first.
Sure. It is wide open. I would say the key for me was it gave me tremendous confidence to be daring, really, and to, especially at a time in my life when no one else was really depending on me. I was on my own, and I actually, when I applied for the Fulbright grant, I asked not to be linked to a university. I felt strongly at that time that I needed to go back after relishing the book-based learning at Yale. I needed to move into more experiential learning. And again, I think if you make a good case for what you really want to do, you'll find amazing creative space with these grants. So I had an independent creative study, which I understand is now institutionalized as one of the Fulbright grants, to follow my intuition. And it led me to stumbling into living with a 3-generation family of migrant family from the countryside to the outskirts of Mexico City. What I did with that later in life, all I can tell you is that it continues to inform everything I do. And I could have gone so many directions with that. So that's why the passion behind your project or your goals is so important, because that's what makes the experience a wellspring for you for the rest of your life, no matter what path you take.
And Laura, can I actually ask you the same question? Because you probably have folks, because now you spent 2 years at Oxford with a Rhodes Scholarship, folks who are now moving on to other things. So what kinds of things are those people doing?
Yeah, so I think I know folks are doing all sorts of things, from going on to like med school or law school, to being like chief of policy for like campaigns back in the States. So it's an interesting, I think, place to have like a to see people like moving in really distinct and like often different ways from where they thought they'd be moving prior to coming to Oxford. So like maybe they had a vision that, you know, they do this program and then go back to doing XYZ thing. But then I think one of the really amazing things about having a chance to pursue a degree in the UK is that you can all of a sudden imagine different possibilities for yourself. So that's what I've been seeing from the people around me. And I'm seeing inklings of it starting now with folks thinking about working for startups in London or staying here to start their own projects in Oxford. But it's a really wide range of things, and all of it seems to be coming from a place, or a large part of it seems to be coming from a place of genuine excitement to take the things that they learned while they were here and apply them in like new ways.
Awesome, thank you. And then we have a question which anyone can take. Why do people apply for these fellowships? And I think maybe, you know, there's a very straightforward reason to get funding for graduate school, but why else do people apply for these fellowships? Sarah.
I mean, for so many reasons, I think that this is a really kind of individualized question. I guess I personally just really wanted to kind of really be able to expand my view of what the subject I'm interested in looks like in different places. And I think in particular, when it comes to international fellowships, kind of maybe understanding, you know, what's something that you're like, when you have something that you're really passionate about, how do people see it in different institutions, in different contexts, at different levels of study? I personally am interested in sort of political healthcare. And so seeing, you know, obviously there's a huge difference between the way that the US and the UK look at medicine in general. And so I really wanted to be able to kind of see what that looks like in person and actually kind of being acted out in the country. And that's just one of many reasons. I mean, it's also just to be able to kind of get a challenge and go somewhere completely different and see what you are going to be able to do in a completely different country and in different settings. Also just being able to have enough, obviously, just funding to be able to continue your academic pursuits. It really is just how much you would be able to define it by yourself and whatever you're really excited to do post-grad. But I think for me, I think the biggest thing is also just, you know, kind of being able to challenge yourself in a healthy way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome. Brian, question to you. I am a first-year student. How do I start?
Yeah, I feel like there might be various takes on this question. My take is I would actually say to not think about it very much. I didn't think about this stuff for like much of my time at Yale. I think most of what I thought about is like and what I would suggest to do is to throw yourself wholeheartedly into what you care about, because that's eventually like what is going to help you win these things when the time actually comes to apply. Is like, can you talk about what you did, why you care about it, and why you think it matters to the world? Those are like the fundamental questions you're going to have to answer. And you know, if you've spent 3 years just like really trying to come up with original ways to like care about, or like to change subjects that you care about, and to like help communities that you care about, then you're going to have a lot to answer with those three questions. And so I would say that, number one. Number two, I would say, I think along the way, to something I wish I had done along the way, like pause and reflect, because a lot of this process is going to be like taking, you know, weeks if not months of like writing, reflecting, pausing, going back, thinking about if what you wrote like actually makes sense, if you're actually like giving the best and most authentic version of yourself. And so if you have like very concretely like a body of writing that you can look back on and like trace the development of your thought process on things that you care about over the last, you know, 1, 2, 3 years, like you're going to have I think a very crucial sort of resource for yourself to tap into. And you'll get to know yourself better, I think, and like it'll help you present yourself better and more comprehensively. So, and then, you know, number three is like along the way also, like as we've been stressing, I think one of the themes of this panel is like, you know, seek help as you go, right? Like seek out the resources that Yale has, all these different funding opportunities. If you have a professor that you like really like what they do, like go to their office hours and strike up a conversation that might not necessarily be about like, you know, what was in class this week, but like about the research they do and why they do it, and like you know, if you can help out or how you might be able to do something similar, or so on and so forth, and like try to build those relationships, because like Sarah was saying, like lots of these people really want you to succeed as well, and will concretely be able to help you do so and to think through things that you might be thinking about. So those would be the three things that I say.
Thank you. Laura, question for you. What do you know now that you wished you had known when you started your application process?
What did I wish I know? There's a lot. I think, I guess I kind of alluded to this earlier, but just that there are like small concrete things that you can start doing now, which will make your life a lot easier, like as you go through this process. So I think, as Sarah already mentioned, right, like it can feel really hard to write that first email to your recommender, but once you do it, like I swear, it's like it's not. For me, it was just always a little bit anxiety inducing to have to type up this email saying, "Hi, I'm applying for this thing and I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm trying to go for it, and would you maybe want to help me?" Like again, like if I'd known how much people wanted me to like start that conversation with them, I think I would have felt a lot more comfortable like beginning that process a lot earlier. So that, and just like second, a lot of it is like, yes, like believing in yourself. I think in terms of like the things that you've done, I think it can, like if you start reading the bios of like what people have done who won in previous years, it can feel like, wow, there's no way that I can compare in the work that I've done to like these really phenomenal and like phenomenal people who are really inspiring. But I think that like probably everyone on this Zoom, like if you spoke with them for 10 minutes, would have something really moving to share about their life and like what they are passionate about and hope to contribute to the world. So I think that if I'd like believed in myself from the get-go a little bit earlier, from the get-go a bit more, a lot more of like the stress that, or like self-doubt that can come with these processes as well, would have gone away.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I'm just going to underscore something which I think is super important in this process as well, which is self-care, and sort of understanding your response to things as you go through them, pacing yourself, right? Because this is both, it's not just an intellectual investment, it's also an emotional investment. And so you have to be sort of prepared for that in different ways. Allison, maybe can I put the question to you? This has came in from somebody, how did your time and experiences at Yale relate to what you are doing now or plan to do with your fellowship, or you did with your fellowship?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Thank you. My freshman year, I was in directed studies, and I just flat out adored it. I sort of didn't know what to do with myself my sophomore year when I was released from that wonderful, cozy world of really small seminars with lots of people talking and sharing ideas. And oh my goodness, and just pushing the limit of opening each other's minds. And when I found myself in Mexico, completely bonding with a family that on paper, you would say that the worlds we came from were so far apart. How is it that I felt so profoundly connected to them as friends? I mean, 6 months into the friendship, I said, gee, I have this research grant. The only thing I want to do is learn more about you and your amazing lives. And would you mind if I wrote about you? I know it sounds awkward because we're friends at this point. And they said yes, and we systematized our conversations. And I asked myself, what's the profound connection here? And I go back to directed studies because those, we read Homer's Odyssey, we read the Iliad, we read these later, and the Aeneid, and these were all books about epic journeys that eventually brought you home, and home into yourself and your self-knowledge. And that's exactly how this family, everyone lived their life. And I came to appreciate, I found often in Mexico that you didn't have to get a PhD to call yourself a philosopher. If you philosophized and thought profoundly about your life, you could self-appoint yourself as a philosopher. And the mother of this family had been through so much hardship. And what she had was her incredible story and her journey with all of its pain. And I deeply connected to her because of this love of the redemptive story, that our stories that redeem us and set our life a little bit higher than the way we live it. So in short, and that just informed then everything else I did, but most powerfully, this undying faith of our human connection and that it's there disguised from us often.
Thank you, Allison. There's another question here. This is actually to Brian and Laura. As the Rhodes Scholars, what surprised you about Oxford and Rhodes, or just studying in the UK as a whole? Brian, you want to go first?
Sure. I think the academic system is very different than back home. I think like it depends on your course, but a lot of us are in courses where there's a few features that are quite different. Just like, I mean, number one is a timing, but you get used to that. The distribution of the workload is quite different. So a lot of the term itself, there's not like that much work to do during the term. And so you're left with these huge pockets of time. And I found it to be quite nice because it was actually like, I don't know, it was one of the first times in a long time that I could like pause and rest. And like read books that I wanted to read and like get to know these people that I was like suddenly around and like becoming friends with, which was quite nice. I think that's like number two of it, is that the application process to these things is incredibly individualized. The experience themselves, and it'll be different depending on the fellowship, but like I think by and large, one theme that all these fellowships try to at least inculcate in some way is like the experience itself is quite social or collective. And so you're meeting people and you're making new friends and you're forming a new community, and you're away from home. But I personally have found the community to be like quite nice and a nice home away from home. And that's something I think that just wasn't on my mind while I was going through the, like I said, the very individualized application process. And I think the last thing I'll say is just like in terms of like a very technical thing about studying being different. The way grades are done is quite different. Grades are all compacted into like very, very few number of assignments, like giant papers, or like one exam to grade an entire course. So different studying experience, but you get used to it, I think. Laura, I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think like +1 to everything. I would maybe just add that as the Rhodes community is something that I've found has been like just like one of the most unique like academic slash like social spaces I've ever been in my entire life. So it's like people from like literally all over the world, because a third of the scholarship is students from the United States, but then like the other 2/3 are from people from all over the world. And it's been such like an amazing experience to be able to make friends from like Jamaica to Belize to South Africa to like all these places that I had never even at Yale like encountered. So I think it's something that I hadn't expected to be such like a formative part of my time at Oxford, but I think maybe more so than even my course, having like the opportunity to learn from people from completely different backgrounds from my own has been like transformative, and definitely has changed who I am as a person.
That's wonderful. There's a question here which, so anyone can answer this, but are all expenses paid with these awards? Tuition, room and board, travel, etc. I don't know who wants to take that.
I can start with the Rhodes, I guess. It's actually quite an important question because I feel like it's not clear. So the Rhodes, like the way it works for Rhodes, for example, is we all get a flat stipend. And so everything is covered in that. They pay for one flight to the UK, they pay for one flight back. So your very first one and your very last one in terms of flights. In terms of tuition is completely paid for us. And then room and board is where there's a bit of a difference, because like I said, we all get a flat stipend, but people have different housing costs. And so you have to sort of take into consideration, like you're choosing an Oxford college, and different colleges have different housing prices typically. And if you have really high rent, then you might get some extra assistance, but by and large, people with different rents just have different rents and just how to manage their personal budgets differently. It's definitely enough to live on and like be fine, but yeah, that's one thing to keep in mind.
And I would just add, there are some fellowships which also offer additional travel. I know some of the internal Yale fellowships will offer additional travel around the UK. We have some Oxbridge fellowships that we use. So it varies a little bit, but normally if it's a partial scholarship, you're told about that, right? So it's going to be $30,000 or whatever it is. So, but Marshall, Rhodes, Fulbright, they are sort of seen as comprehensive fellowships in terms of living and tuition and that kind of thing. So our final question, because we're just going to finish up here, and I'll ask this from each of you. So what one piece of advice would you give to each type of participant in our audience? First year, sophomore, junior, senior, or alum? So Sarah, I'm going to ask you to give advice to first years, Brian to sophomores, Laura to, let's do juniors and seniors, and Allison to alumni. Go ahead, Sarah.
I definitely think for first years, almost don't think about fellowships too much, in the sense that you don't want, I think Brian actually was talking about this, but don't start targeting everything to what do I need to do now as a first year, like how can I hit the ground running. You don't want to get super caught up in thinking about your end point, because that is something that kind of starts to come naturally as you start getting there. Obviously be thinking about building the right connections to get you there, building, or not just connections, but like deep relationships with professors, taking classes that make you happy and being able to do well in them, being able to find what fits best for you. And I think, just really focusing a lot on how to make your undergraduate experience something that is really fulfilling and finding the things that actually really fit best. I think it really is just about carving out your own space, and not getting super caught up yet in all of those details, because you really just want to be genuine and really authentic and showing up for the communities that you care about. And then in turn, things will start figuring themselves out as you get closer to it.
All right, Brian, sophomores.
Sure. So I think two or three things. Number one, I would say, so I guess if you're a sophomore at this point, you're sort of, nearing the end of your sophomore year, I think you have enough time under your belt at Yale where you can start thinking about like sort of what the arc of your last 2 years has been. And so on the same note of what I was saying earlier in terms of like pausing and reflecting about your time and thinking about sort of the trajectory of your thought on issues and things that you care about, like, take some time and think about like what these last 2 years have meant, how your like attitude and disposition towards things have changed, how the questions that you're asking about the real world, how they've changed and so on. So yeah, basically tracing that arc and what it looks like. I think number two, you're going to be coming in as a junior. Don't be afraid to like step into leadership roles now and like take initiative and like, especially as first gen students, where you might like, we don't always feel like this place is for us or was built for us. Like, don't be afraid to, obviously while being respectful, like taking up space, and leading charges and initiatives on the things that are important to you. And number three, sort of somewhat counterbalancing the second point, which is to say, like, if there's sort of a pivot in your Yale arc that you want to make, if you've been like, a super, I don't know, let's say you've been super academic and you really cared about research, but now you want to care more about, say, like organizing or activism or something, like, I don't know, I think some people might feel like, oh, you're coming in as an incoming junior soon and that's going to be, too late or too old. Like, definitely not. Like, if that's what matters to you, like, do it. And when time comes to apply to these things, like, there'll be, if everything that you did genuinely, like, there'll be an arc to trace and it'll all make sense. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Laura, quickly, because we're running out of time, but for juniors and seniors, one piece of advice.
Yeah, I guess plus one to everything that everyone's already said. Just the second thing being like, sitting with yourself and thinking like, what is it that I realistically have time to commit myself to doing? Because I think, as we've kind of stressed or pointed out already, each of these fellowship processes is time consuming and requires like a lot of effort. So if it isn't something that you're necessarily going to be able to fit into your junior year or your senior year, then that's fine. But know that you can make time for that later, whether that be post-graduating or perhaps if you're junior, then somehow during your senior year. But I would just say, like, to avoid a situation where you're really stressed out and not enjoying your senior fall or what have you, then like making time for that and recognizing that it's going to be a commitment on top of whatever additional extracurricular or social spaces you normally devote your time to.
Awesome, thank you. And Allison, just to finish up, for any alumni on the call.
Yeah, everything everyone said was fabulous. I would just say you can have a fellowship at other points in your life. There is no march here. This is your story. And you can bring your family on fellowships. The Fulbright Association, we have affinity groups that include Fulbright families, people who take their young children on grants with them. So keep your mind open to your own authentic path, as everyone's been saying.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, all of you, for all of your thoughts. And it's so delightful to see you again. Thank you, Lisa, for hosting us. It was really, really great. And it's been a wonderful evening. So with some really helpful comments and great questions. Thank you, everyone.
And on behalf of First Gen Yale, I want to thank Rebecca, Brian, Allison, Laura, and Sarah, and also Annie Friedman, who's helping us with operations. So you guys have been terrific. Great questions, great comments. I mean, you inspire us all to want to apply, even me. Allison, I'm gonna look into the Fulbright. I'm not kidding you. So I didn't even think I could do it. So thank you for that. And for all the students here, feel free to contact the Office of Fellowships and Funding at funding.yale.edu. And you can set up an appointment, you can email, you can text, you can look at all the resources on the incredible website. But please take advantage of this opportunity. And when you're ready, maybe not freshman year, but later on, explore yourself, as Sarah was saying, and take time for, to just learn and grow. But you really, Rebecca, you're a wonderful resource, and it's an honor and a privilege for us to work with you on these programs and really get the word out. How wonderful you are and your office is, and the resources that are available to all students at Yale. So just want to thank you and have everyone have a good night.